I'm thinking about God again, and what that term might mean, and whether it has any significance at all, and those kind of questions really. And I'm really picking up on the last video I made, which was to do with how mind might be conceived. And what I was saying in that one was that without getting into any kind of substance dualism questions, I think it is certainly possible to think about mind as a process, as being what the brain does, and then thinking about, for me at least, that kind of releases me from having to think in terms of the materialities of neuroscience, for example. When thinking about mind, I can think about what the properties of mind are, what these activities are. Activities isn't quite the right word, but the kinds of processes that mind seems to go through, and what kinds of, not exactly components, but what aspects of those processes can be brought out and analysed individually. And of course there's lots of different models for what these components might be. As I was saying in the last video, we tend to think of mind as an object, and we tend to think of the components of mind as kind of objects, and that's something I'm trying to get away from, but just to reiterate that, to make sure I know what I'm talking about, one thing's for sure, that when you're talking about mind, and I don't know where I started out talking about God, didn't I? Oh well, I'm going to get to God eventually, I think. But when you're talking about mind, you're never talking about a single kind of undivided, smooth, featureless substance or featureless process. We always think of it in terms of different components, different aspects, different threads running through it. And some of the famous ones, of course, are kind of Freudian models of mind, which is that id-ego, superego thing, a little bit like a steam engine. Or you get the kind of Jungian models of mind, which is something like concentric circles, a bit like an onion skin model. Or you get slightly more contemporary models of mind, which are more like collectives of slightly stupider entities. You find that in Minsky, in this idea of the society of mind. You find it in Dennet. I think he calls them sprites or demons somewhere in his writing. These uniquely dim, unconscious processes that have a kind of singular activity, a bit like the numbskulls that used to feature in the Beano, but these little creatures that collectively shout and that's the kind of model of some of those things. But either way, the whole point is that the mind is subdivided into different elements. If the mind's an object, those elements are subunits within that construction. If the mind's a process, then these are sub-processes, sub-routines, if you like. And one of the things I've been thinking of in terms of that is, to what extent is it useful thinking about this idea of God being an element of psychological functioning? It would require quite a radical reinterpretation of what psychological functioning means, because I think as long as we're thinking about psychological or psychology or psyche itself as being entirely supervenient upon the brain, then that's going to be always tricky, or at least it's always going to locate God and every function of mind as simply happening inside that skull of yours. But I don't think that's really a problem, because I think there's lots of understandings of mind as process which don't lock it within inside the brain, in the same way that when I was using the car analogy earlier on, I was saying that the kind of parallel process model of mind could be found in cars. There's the material object and the material substance of the car and its engine and its wheels, and then there's the motion that the car undergoes as a result of having those mechanisms. And in this analogy, that motion is mind. Well, the motion that a car produces or undergoes, or is part of its being, if you like, that motion doesn't happen in the car. It happens in the relationships between the car and the environment. And I think it's perfectly possible, it's slightly incomprehensible, but possible to think of it in similar ways with mind, that mind doesn't just happen in the brain, although clearly the brain is what's doing it. Mind is the process that the brain engages in relation to both the outside world and the interior environment of the body and all those kind of things. So so mind is what happens in the world as a result of the activities of the brain. And those activities are various. Those activities are, some of them are slightly more encompassing than others. Some of them fulfill different functions. And one of those functions could potentially be this kind of God function, I'm thinking. Maybe there's an aspect of the psyche, of the activities of that the mind undergoes, which corresponds to something like God. I think it would probably be I think you'd have to conceive of that as the big function, really. The huge function. Yeah, I don't know what it would be exactly. I'm just thinking that, I just want to spend a minute or so just trying to correlate that with other understandings of God, because I don't want to just like reinvent God wholesale, because that's a bit tedious. But certainly the attributes that one normally gives to traditional gods, which are bogus as far as I'm concerned, but the attributes you usually give to them are things like a creator, things like some kind of moral lawgiver, things like a kind of place to go to after you die, like representative of home, that kind of thing, and where you were before you were born. And I think there is a conception of an extent of a component of psychological functioning in this extended understanding of what psyche is, which corresponds to God and which perhaps fulfills some of those functions, maybe. I mean, certainly in terms of the idea of God as creator, there certainly does seem to be an aspect of psychological functioning which is highly creative. I seem to be walking through a world right now, and that world is being created, not as some kind of holistic, holographic illusion by my brain, or that could be one part of it, but the world around me is emerging out of the relations between my sensory motor system, between whatever the material substance of the world is, between those aspects of the material substance of the world that I can't directly access, but nevertheless are undoubtedly there and are giving it the form and the experiential qualities that it has. And the fact that I'm able to experience that is perhaps part of some kind of what I can think of as some kind of extended creative function, which we can call it God if we like. Then there's this kind of moral lawgiver function. I'm not so sure about that one. I mean, certainly morals don't come out of Scripture. I think that's pretty straightforward enough. The most convincing argument I think of that is found in the Euthyphro. I can't do the full argument with it now because it takes too long, but either way, wherever morals come from, they don't come from inside the brain, nor do they come from a scripture. They come from the interactions that one has with other people, the interactions that one has with animals and the environment, the whole history of interactions with people and animals and environment that have created us as the kind of individuals we are. And that's not a function which resides inside the box of bone on top of your neck. It's not a transcendent function at all. It's not that. It's just that it's a processual feature of a big mind. God, yeah, I don't want to go there. Of this kind of mind at large idea, moral lawgiver. And then there's this thing about going home and at the end of your life and coming out of that home at the beginning of your life. I'm quite sure about that, really. I mean, I've talked a bit before about death and about how the physical matter of the body undoubtedly does return to the physical matter of the world. And the lights go out in your consciousness, and that's the end of that. Well, that's the end of your consciousness. It's not the end of the physical matter of your body. Obviously that has a very long life beyond you, and presumably the atoms that make up your body will be around for as long as there are atoms to be had, and similarly they were around since the first atoms were produced by exploding stars all those billions of years ago. So again, I think there's a perfectly straightforward materialist function it's not terribly well, it's a bit consoling. It's not as consoling as this kind of God the Father welcoming you into his arms, but I think there is something there about that, about return and origins, individual origins and individual returns. Yeah, it all sounds a bit bogus, actually, I have to say. It sounds like I'm talking about yeah, it's all sounding a bit transpersonal psychology. I'm not altogether happy with that, really. I'll keep at it. There's something interesting there about the idea of God as an element of a processual psyche.